May Kier's mercy follow you into the eternal dark. Now.
It's captured a butterfly.
Well, it looks like a civil war is starting within the MDR department after losing the glue that kept the team together in Irv. Meanwhile, we meet a new character who may be more important than you think. Hello to all your wonderful innies and outies out there, and welcome to my deep dive breakdown and review of Severance Season 2, Episode 5. A Trojan Horse of an episode where deep secrets were hidden in plain sight. Where questions come to mind like, have we taken for granted that Milch may have actually been nice to the innies this whole time? Will Dylan continue Irv's mission to discovering where the elevator goes through the export halls? And speaking of Irv, will his outie learn to grow close to Bert on the outside as his innie did from within? With all that said, get your notepads out because it's time for your performance review as we discuss this episode, spoilers ahead. We open with a mysterious man pushing a cart, the same man I'm guessing Felicia spoke of back in episode 2 as the one who's now responsible for transferring items to the export halls, which is what we see him do later in this scene. Now we hear this mysterious person whistling what I initially thought was the Cure Chosen One song, but it's actually a 1976 song by the name of The Wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. Now personally, I wasn't familiar with the song or the lyrics and what they had to say, but after looking it up, it appears to tell a story about a Great Lakes freighter that sank in the storm in 1975, killing all 29 crew members. Now here's the thing that's odd. The crew of 29 all died, but no bodies were recovered. It's said that it may have swamped or suffered structural failure or topside damage or suffered from a combination of all those things. Even after many years of investigations, the exact cause of the sinking remains unknown. Now, of course, there's a possibility that this mystery guy can just simply be a fan of the song, but I think we all know that everything in the show has a deeper meaning. Could he maybe have been on the ship during the wreckage and said to be dead, but became a part of a Lumen experiment similar to Gemma in Cold Harbor? Or I talked about it on the channel before, could this have any connections to what happened in the Lexington letter? Which again, spoiler warning for those that haven't read the Lexington letters, that is canon to the show. It was concluded by the story's main character that Lumen had been involved in a possible terrorist attack against one of their main competitors. So could Lumen have been involved with the wreckage of that ship because it carried valuable equipment or cargo of one of its main competitors in the 70s? Now honestly, that might be a bit of a stretch to have this show taking a real life tragedy and injecting that tragedy into their story, but it's definitely something that crossed my mind after looking up that song and the meaning of that song. Now, as we watch this person make their way to optics and design, you notice the show intentionally makes sure that we never get a clear shot of their face, clearly hiding their identity because I think they must be important for later on down the season. Make sure to stick around to the end of this video where I share my thoughts on who I think this may be. Now, this mysterious person arrives to meet Felicia and Elizabeth as they give him a set of dental equipment. Now, after he gathers his equipment, he continues to whistle that song and makes his way to the export halls into the mysterious elevator that is the passage down to the testing floor. Now, go ahead and drop your thoughts on who you all think this mysterious person is, but let's talk about the fact that when he went down the elevator, he used a black card. I bring that up because, as we know in this very episode, it appears that those in management roles or roles above the innies or those that aren't severed only have access to this card. Now, the show purposely shows Milch using his black card later in this episode, so again, whoever this mysterious person is, they're not severed, and they have some level of clearance that points them towards not being just some regular Severance employee. Now, going back to that dental equipment, we know that optics and design is known for having a hand in many things on the severed floor, but one of the most mysterious ones is them handling the removal of items from the machine to be sent through the export halls, but we've yet to learn the purpose of those items. Could the items they're passing through the halls be defective in some way and meant to cause harm or damage to Lumen's competitors? For example, some dentist uses this faulty equipment, they injure their client, this person sues the company and it puts them out of business. We know that Lumen is in the pharmaceutical business, and one would imagine they have a hand in the medical field and most likely have dental competitors. Or we can think about the opposite. Is this purposely being made for Lumen and distribution for their own company, or maybe a mixture of both? They make their own products that they use and distribute to their own company, or they send out defective ones to hurt and maybe destroy their competitors. Now we cut to seeing Mark doing his new morning routine with his reintegration process with taking his pills as he gets a call from his sister. Now you notice that the pills and the drink that he takes in this scene is actually seen in the opening credits sequence. Now Devin asks how his weekend retreat went, which actually confirms and debunks my suspicions if Lumen actually did get the permission from their Audis. As Mark tells his sister that he thinks everything went well, but he was told that he accidentally fell off of a rope, which explains why he found himself wet when his Audi came too. Now Devin is still under the impression that Mark is still going along with his retina side project to send a message to his innie, as he hasn't told her that he actually got reintegrated, most likely because of his fear of her disapproval after what happened to Petey. Now we see that Ragabi is living with Mark temporarily as they continue their work, which we can see Mark is eager to continue that because he's unable to remember his innie's experiences, but she suggests that maybe his innie has. Now I couldn't make out this picture or Mark's fridge, but doesn't it remind you all of the four tempers that we saw when we had Dylan doing his waffle party? It could just be a random sketch, but it kind of reminds me of that moment. Now back at Lumen, and for those keeping track like myself, this conversation is happening on a Sunday, a day after the team building retreat, as we see Helena meeting with Natalie and Mr. Drummond. Now she claims that she's fine after what happened with Irving and she being outed, and wants to update her father, but is told that they decided to spare him of the knowledge of the occurrence. Now Helena is told that her tempers will be rebalanced soon, which is a term I can't remember being phrased like that in the show before. Now my best guess is that the Glasgow block blocks her tempers, which could possibly explain her decision to sleeping with Mark, but also explains why she was more relaxed and a little bit more jokey more than her normal self, because her tempers weren't actively working during those moments. Now she's told that Mark is 81% complete with the Cole Harbor file, as Natalie encourages her that she can do this as they want her to return to the severed floor as Helly are. Now Helena doesn't want to return because of her life-threatening experience with her own innie Helly, and of course recently what happened with Irv. Now she calls them animals and suggests that she just fake being Helly are again. Now they tell her that they just can't take that chance again after what happened with the retreat, as Drummond tells her that father encouraged this idea. Now throughout that conversation, Helena says to Drummond she says father, and he responds by saying father encouraged it. Was that suggesting that maybe that is his literal father and that Drummond and Helena are actually siblings? Or him saying father is just him acknowledging that Jane is the current CEO of the company and that the Egans are looked at with such high regard that they refer to them as like their actual father. Now we cut to Monday morning where Mark arrives to work, as this is cut between hearing Natalie reaffirming that he must work with Helly R, and Drummond says that the work is mysterious and important and Helly R is required to Mark to focus to get this completed. Now as we see Helena enters the elevator and she's nervous because this is the first time allowing her innie to return since the gala incident, as we hear the ding and we see the transformation confirming the return of Helly R, her first time this season being back on the severed floor. As we see her fist balled up like it was in episode 1 of season 1 when her innie was essentially seeing the world for the first time. I'm assuming that this is a little Helly R tick that she does when she's nervous. As she's greeted by a happy smiling Miss Wong, who introduces herself and tells her that Mr. Milch will explain everything. Now there are so many moments in this episode that confirms that Helly R is indeed back, but as we see Miss Wong and Helly walk to Milch's office, the Helly R iconic walk of confidence told me everything I need to know that this was indeed Helly R. Now as they arrive, you notice the seriousness in Helly's face switches to relief when she immediately sees Mark, but unfortunately Mark isn't as receptive to seeing her, as we'll talk about and learn why later. Now Mr. Milchick welcomes them into his office as classic Helly-isms are slowly coming back as she demands answers to what's going on and to why Irv was drowning her. Now she's not the only one demanding answers, as Dylan wants to know where Irv is. Now Helly R thinks the team has her back, but she sees the change in them once Dylan tells her that she's an Egan, obviously not having the opportunity to telling them what she saw during the OTC. Now Milchick is about to give us as the audience the full understanding of how exactly does the Glasgow block work, but he's bombarded with questions about Irvin's whereabouts and Helly trying to figure out why her outie took her place. Now Mr. Milchick confirms Irv's permanent dismissal, or as Dylan calls it, death. Now you know we can't go one episode without a classic Milchick lie, as he tells them that Irv is on a cruise voyage. Now Helly is upset and frustrated with what Helena did, which leads to Milchick telling them the story of,
Have you ever heard the story of the Glaxschupen? In ancient times, the king of Sweden himself was known to go incognito amongst his people in the hopes of learning their true grievances. He would don an old gray robe, a krakshupen, the name for which he was remembered, to disguise his royal vestments. Keir Egan himself was known to do so in his ether factories.
Now, believe it or not, Mr. Milchick was actually telling the truth. According to Swedish legend, Charles XI traveled around the country dressed as a farmer or a simple traveler. And as the legend says, this is referred to as the Grey Coat. This was done to discover the identity, corruption, and oppression against the populace. Now, they don't believe him, which rightfully so, because he is always lying. But again, Mr. Milchick is displaying more honesty and confirms that Irv will not be returning to work. Now, this morning meeting ends as Milchick walks them back to their workplace, which has a brand new makeover. Their once 4-person workstation is now turned into a tri-station, and their team photo has also been changed, with Irv being removed. Now, of course, Dylan being Dylan isn't a fan of these new changes, and he lets Milchick know, but he's also reminded that his words have consequences and could affect his certain perks, aka seeing his Audi's wife again. Now, that remark doesn't stop Dylan from demanding that they have a funeral for Irv. Now, we see Helly agrees with this funeral idea, but Mark isn't 100% as excited or as in sync with the others, as he says yes, but as long as it is quick because he wants to get back to work. Now, talking about Mark and his response in that previous scene. Now, later we will see him being a little bit more deflated after learning of Helena's betrayal and their plans being made aware by her and telling Lumen. But there was something off about Mark S. in this episode, and we'll be discussing that a little bit later. Now, speaking of Mark, we see that he's developed some type of cough and he heads into the bathroom. Now, we see Helly goes to check on him, which is kind of funny to me because it's kind of the reverse of what we would see Mark do to her when she would go to the bathroom in season 1. But we see Helly questions Mark about not being able to tell the difference between her and Helena, as he tells her that she was like Helly, or more like Helly is like her. Now, Mark doesn't share with her what happened during the OTC situation, nor does he want to know what happened to her, as Helly is left in disbelief about not having the same connection with him as before. Now, putting herself in Helly R's shoes in this moment and remembering the last time she saw Mark. Last time she saw him, they kiss each other, and the reaction that Mark gave in episode 1 of this very season by hugging Helena was what I bet Helly thought that she was going to be greeted to when she saw him again. But again, she doesn't know what happened between Mark and her Audi, and makes me think that maybe after experiencing that intimate sexual experience, do you all think that Mark actually misses Helena? Now, back in Milchick's back office, we see him and Ms. Wong preparing the bereavement, which she points out are normally for innies who die on the floor. Which, not to get too far off track, but this is a question I've always wondered: what if an innie died at work? I mean, do they pay for the funeral? How do they explain what happened to their family? Do they just give them a gift card to go to the local diner to get some food and maybe take that as forgiveness? Anyway, we see Milchick lets her know that the innie's affections index read at the high 60s. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time we have confirmation that Lumen has regular readings on the emotional state throughout their day. I mean, it makes sense that the chip gives them information for data purposes, that they read them to make sure that they're in the proper headspace to work, but I don't ever recall them actually saying that out loud. Now, we see Ms. Wong ask permission to say a question, which is a very odd way to phrase that, but she ends up saying more of her opinion, as she says that he shouldn't allow them to have a funeral because it makes them feel like people. Now, she goes on and she mentions that today is Milchick's first performance review. It was almost like she was saying to him, if you keep doing these things with the innies and getting all close and personal to them, it's going to impact your review. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this conversation, so let's talk about this here, and that's the comment she made about not allowing the funeral to happen because it can make the innies feel like actual people. I mean, that's a pretty messed up remark to make, especially coming from Ms. Wong, who we still don't know if she's even a human herself. Now, I've mentioned this in previous theory videos about how Mrs. Wong could maybe be a Lumen robot, and maybe she's not even aware that she's a synthetic robot and she just thinks that she's a regular human. But then also mentioning her sassiness towards Milchick in this scene, and her mentioning his performance review and turning and looking at him and saying that that was a question. This whole scene just continues to show the discomfort between these two characters, or at least from Milchick's point of view. Now, as I've said before, I'm in the camp that I think that she might be some type of synthetic robot, and I think Milchick doesn't like the idea that a robot was placed in his previous position because he took such pride in his work, and this plays into how he feels that he's not as important to the company like he thought. Again, playing with this idea that she's a robot, he's thinking that they replaced him with some robot who lacks the skills or ability to connect with the innies on a human level, and is also maybe here to observe and somewhat question his decisions as the office manager. I want you all to keep this conversation in mind for a scene with Milch coming up pretty soon. Now, as we make our way to the funeral, where we see a digital Irv saying goodbye and a sign that shows his time at Lumen in quarters and not actual years or even dates, Milch begins the bereavement. As we see them with their Irv coffee mugs in hand and silently remembering him for 9 seconds and thanking Kier for their time with him. Now, Dylan shares a story about this one time where Irv put toner in his coffee, but he made sure not to hurt Dylan in doing so. To me, basically the story has the meaning behind of like Irv was stuck in his ways. He was very much in his ways, but he never let that get in the way of truly caring for his friends, but more importantly, protecting them as well. Now, Dylan is still upset with himself, not listening to Irv, but also not helping him when he needed it, but he says that Irv still managed to leave him with a positive, lasting, important message with him. As Dylan ends his eulogy and Milchick says that he has a little bit of sugar with some salt, as they're given Irv's fruit head with a hair complemented by a Black Beauty watermelon. And just when I thought Milchick was on the path of maybe stopping with his ridiculous, unnecessary lies, he tells them that the melon comes from the country of Malaysia. Now, as Helly checks in on Dylan, they notice that Mark is leaving to go back to work. Now, Dylan takes this moment by Mark to clap back at him by mentioning if he has told Helly about Miss Casey being his outtie's wife. Now, Helly confronts Mark about his coldness towards her since her return, as Helly wants to help with Miss Casey, but he tells her that
because they are smarter than us, okay? They know everything. Me, looking for Ms. Casey, us wandering around, meeting other departments, mapping the floor, all of it. They know everything we're doing because Helena told them everything we're doing.
Now, going back to earlier, Mark being uncomfortable or having some type of uneasiness around her, he isn't 100% sure if he can actually trust her again, if it's actually Helly, but she tells him that he can trust her and that their relationship is real, unlike other things at Lumen. Now, getting back to what we were talking about earlier with Mark's attitude being kind of off in this episode, do you all feel that Mark's new attitude towards giving up after learning of Helena's involvement was the only reason he was acting like this in this episode? Or does his new attitude have anything to do with his reintegration? We know that Outie Mark is far more of a pessimistic version of Mark, and I'm starting to wonder if it's affecting his innie, and will we maybe see Outie Mark being more like his innie and being more optimistic as they start to share a consciousness? Now, we see Milchick is greeted by Natalie for his first performance review, but before going in, he has a question for her about the paintings.
I was just wondering if you could share with me a little how you felt when you received the paintings. Because I'm thinking our experiences here have been similar in some ways. We face similar challenges. And perhaps the paintings and the somewhat complicated feelings they evoke.
Now, just like episode 3, Natalie's face says one thing, but her actions and her non-response to his question tells me that she isn't a fan of those paintings, but she knows that Lumen is always listening and smiles and doesn't answer his question and leads him into the review. The conversation with Ms. Wong and how it relates to feeling human and being treated like one has to make Milchick reflect on his experience and his reaction to those paintings and not feeling fully appreciated or feeling like a clog in the machine that is Lumen. Slowly but surely, I think we're going to see more of Milchick's humanity and him questioning more of the ways of the company, especially after this review, which had so many micromanagement comments. Now, Mr. Drummond conducts this review, and the process is extremely detailed because it can take anywhere between 2 to 6 hours depending on the atonements and the apparitions required. Now, it starts off with the positives. His attendance and his urinalysis were excellent. I guess they check their manager's urine on a regular basis to make sure that they're not on drugs during work hours, or honestly probably during any hours of the day. But unfortunately, there are 2 negatives that are extremely disturbing revelations.
Uses too many big words. On several of your daily logs, the paperclip was installed back to front, which led to a confusion as to where in the document to begin reading. Here are the incidents.
But in all seriousness, the most important is the situations that are deemed relevant. One of them being him hiring the new refiners that didn't work out. The other being him introducing kindness reforms that haven't proven to prevent the levels of curiosity by the team. And lastly, the retreat that resulted in the firing of one employee and almost the death of one that holds the Egan name and Helena. Now this is cut between Mark going through his files, some that we've seen before, but there's also some new ones as well, as we see Mr. Drummond reminding Milch of the utmost importance of Cold Harbor.
Mark Scout's completion of Cold Harbor will be remembered as one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet.
As he encourages Seth to go back to the basics and to remember the severed employees' greater purpose and how to treat them as what they really are. Now we'll come back to those comments, but looking at Seth's package here. Now we already heard about the first 3 failures, but you'll notice this one is in regards to using the OTC on Dylan, who took that card referred to as the card 7197G, which we know had major consequences. As we watch Seth looking through the pages, saying he's using too many big words and not properly using paper clips, but again, more importantly, another person telling him to treat them like they are, inferring that they're not human like Miss Wong said. And also that the kindness reform being his idea, I believe the show is 100% alluding to the fact that Seth Milch, in his own way, truly did or does care for the innies more than most of the Lumen employees. But as he's reminding the scene that kindness isn't the way to getting the best production out of these things, as they like to call them, and don't care for their needs and make sure that the work is complete. So that scene just proved to me that maybe Milch wasn't so bad all along. I mean, minus the crazy lies that he would make, I mean, he wasn't that bad, right? But we see him telling Drummond that he's gonna be tightening the leash, and this makes Drummond happy. Now look, I think we all have our grievances with Mr. Seth, but he keeps things fun around the office. I mean, we have these fun, deadly field trips. We of course have the jazz dance parties, and he's just a fun guy and means well by the innies. Now meanwhile, we see Mark is now 85% done on the Cold Harbor file, but begins seeing symptoms of being reintegrated as he's glitching again. Now Mark notices that it's almost time to leave for the day as he heads towards the elevators, and just as it's about to go up, in comes Milch, who confronts him for leaving work 6 minutes early, which again tightening that leash, as he wants to have a chat with Mr. Marquez. Now we see that personal space isn't existent in this conversation, as he's within inches from Mark's face, as he asks Mark how did the funeral go and if he got what he needed. Now again, Mark being in his rebellious era, he mentions the BS article that was shown to him back in episode 1, but again, Milch, tightening that leash, responds by getting even closer after Mark continues to be condescending. He looks Mark dead in the eyes and says to him,
Did you and Helly catch up?
We did.
Did you tell her that you fucked her outie at the Orpo?
Now this look on Mark's face was my exact reaction to what he was just told by Mr. Milch. Look man, we got this new version of Milch who's a little bit more sassy. He's not taking any more kindness. He's not taking any more lips from the innie. This is the new version of Milch that I'm actually kind of secretly looking forward to seeing, just for simply entertaining purposes, of course. Again, it caught me off guard, his comments towards Mark, and again, I'm down for this side of him only because I miss Cobell's shenanigans. To me, this is my favorite scene of this episode, and is paired perfectly with his walk from the elevator. Now, as Mark heads out for the day, you notice who's watching him. It's Helena. Now, earlier I mentioned if Mark S. misses Helena, but I wonder if Helena misses Mark S. and may be paying his outie a visit sometime soon. Now, going back to the work hours and backtracking a bit to what happened with the rest of Dylan in this episode, he accepts Irv's fate and he says goodbye to his fruit head, but he recognizes something before he leaves. As he leaves the break room, he looks at that hang in there poster and remembers those were the last words that Irv told him.
It's all okay. Just remember, hang in there.
And as we discussed in my latest theory video, this was indeed a message with a deeper hidden meaning literally behind it. As Dylan finds the drawings of the export halls drawn by Irv with instructions on the back that look like a GTA cheat code on how to get to the elevator from Felicia. Now, did you all take him putting that back as him saying like, I'll be back and get this, I just can't take this now and risk it being taken from me and not continuing the mission of Irv? Or did you all read that as him trying to ignore the message because he doesn't want to risk losing his visits with Gretchen or maybe meeting his kids one day? Now, personally, I think that's him just putting that back for now because it's coming to the end of the day, and again, he doesn't want to get caught and doesn't want to lose this, and he wants to continue what Irv started. Now, switching sceneries, we get a little sneak peek preview of Rickon's new version of the book made for the Innies as his wife reads a passage. Now, Rickon, who's calling Natalie Nat at this point in their relationship, he suggests that the new verbiage and the new language really encourages the Innies to thrive off structure, but Devin finds it all to be very lumen coded as they get into a little bit of an argument, and this is where we get the title of the episode, the Trojan Horse, which for those that don't know is a type of malware that pretends to be a legit program but has hidden malicious code, as the term comes from the ancient Greek story of the Trojan Horse that led to the fall of Troy, which to me is very interesting and it has a deeper meaning within itself because it can play out in a couple of different ways. One is it can just take it on face value of what Rickon is doing by giving the Innies to becoming slaves to the words of Lumen for encouragement to focus at work. Or maybe Rickon will have a change of heart and he's going to listen to his wife. Or maybe we're going to see, speaking of his wife, maybe Devin's going to manage to sneak in like subliminal messaging within the book to get to Mark and thinking that this is a safe way to get a message to his Innie. Now we see that they get into a disagreement about how he's essentially adding to the mistreatment of the Innies, but Rickon reminds her that they agreed to use his book as an opportunity to financially secure their future for their family. Now, we've discussed my suspicions about Rickon before and recently discussed his involvement with the possible creation of the Dieter story, but I'm going to bring this up again. At this point in the show, where do you stand with Rickon? Could the online theories of him secretly being an Egan or having some relation to them be true? Let me know in the comments. Do you all trust Rickon? Let me know in the comments below. Now, as we come to the end of this episode, we catch up to what Audi Irv is doing. We watch as he pulls down his paintings in kind of a way of him accepting his recent firing and getting rid of the side project of getting messages to his Innie for reasons we still aren't too fully aware of yet. Now we see him revisiting that same phone booth and calling who I believe is Ragabi as he tells this mysterious person,
"It's me again. So, they fired me. I think they know what my Innie was up to. I'm telling you to..."
Now going back to that phone call before he hung up, Irving Audi knows that his Innie is getting the message, but who's the one that's confirming all this? Now we know that Ragabi knows what's going on with Lumen because she seems to have an inside person because she knew about the OTC situation. So was her inside person Irv? Is he calling and leaving her messages? Why aren't they meeting in person if this is Ragabi? Or is this someone else entirely that he's calling? And if so, drop your guesses in the comments below. Now, Irv approaches this car to see that it's Bert, but of course this is a stranger to him. Now, Bert tells him that he's been following him ever since he caught him knocking on his door. Now, Irv switches his position and apologizes to how he came at Bert. Now, they both discuss working at Lumen and both being severed as Bert tells him about his firing, and the reason being that he was told that he was in an unsolicited erotic entanglement with another employee, as they're able to put two and two together and realize that their Innies were most likely in a relationship at work. Now, we find out that Bert's husband's name is Fields, who wasn't happy to hear the news about what happened at work in this entanglement, which causes some friction in their relationship. Now, this friction leads to Bert inviting Irv over for dinner the next night to help explain the situation to his husband. Now, we can see within this exchange, they still have this sense of chemistry and they have this natural way of gravitating towards one another, and they seem to have a basic level of comfortability around each other. So I'm really interested to see where this Audi story goes between Bert and Irv. Now, we end this episode with Ragabi going through Gemma's belongings to help the process of Mark's reintegration to rattle his memories. As we get this shot of a necklace that Mark has encased, I'm sure this will come back at some point because right now it doesn't look too familiar to me, as the symbol in the middle may have some ties to Lumen. Now, as they talk about her cremated ashes, he tells Ragabi,
"Who's in there?"
They know people at the morgue. On the payroll like everywhere else in here.
As this confirms what I mentioned weeks ago about Gemma's death involving her body being burnt in the accident, but it being a way for Lumen to getting and replacing her body in ashes with someone else. Now, she notices that Mark has a cough and she's even concerned about that, which makes me believe that that's something that we should keep an eye out for future episodes as well. Now, again, Mark is eager to continue their work, but she's not ready to rush things because of the risk, and as they say their goodnights, we see Mark's ask her if they're hurting her as Ragabi says that she doesn't know. Now from here, Audi Mark experiences the glitches and begins hearing Miss Casey, but to him, he's hearing his wife's voice for the first time since her alleged death. Now as Mark gets deeper into the glitching, he arrives in the halls that lead into the wellness department as he hears one of the sessions between his innie and Miss Casey. Now as he exits into the hallway, he turns around to see his wife as Miss Casey, who looks at him and says,
"Once captured a butterfly, your Audi is going to be home."
Now that was a great emotional way to end this episode, but I want to point something out. If you all notice in the end credits, they have Keir Egan listed as appearing in this episode, but they kept the actor who we met at the beginning a mystery. So going back to what I mentioned earlier, who do I think that mysterious person is? Could it be possible that the mysterious guy at the beginning of this episode is indeed Keir Egan and became the story about the... Does Keir Egan go down to the severed floor to disguise himself to be amongst the innies? Remember it was said that he would don a gray robe, and the mysterious man, we know he has gray hair, and Milch said that he would do this in the past when he worked at his factory. Now, if it's not Keir Egan himself, there's no doubt in my mind that whoever this mysterious person is, they are very important to the story because there has to be a reason why they didn't show his face in this episode. So overall, man, I thought this was a really good, what I like to call a reset episode. We saw the refining team having a reset after what happened to Irv, but also individually, we have Helly who has to reset for being back and learning her Audi hijacked her identity. You look at Innie Mark, who has to reset his relationship with Helly and see if he still wants to help find his Audi's wife. You look at Innie Dylan, who has to reset without his buddy Irv and see if he's willing to continue his work with the export halls. You look at what's going on with Milch. He has to reset himself and leaning more into managing with an iron fist and maybe taking a page out of Colbell's book. Which, speaking of Colbell, she's been absent for the last 2 episodes, and I hope that we get her return pretty soon. This episode did a good job of capturing the moments after a funeral when you realize things aren't and will not maybe be the same moving forward, and it will be very interesting what comes next for these characters. What's next for the Audis, Irv and Bert? What's next with Helena and Mark? Now, speaking of what's coming next week's episode is titled Attila. And the synopsis reads, as bonds are tested on the severed floor, outside Irv attends a fraught dinner while Mark takes a reckless risk. Now it sounds like the tensions are still high in the MDR department and Irv's going to meet Field, but what exactly will the reckless decision be made by from Mark? So there you have it. You all have made it to the end of this week's breakdown. I really appreciate you all, and if you're still here watching this video, put in the comments right now, hashtag Trojan Horse. Now again, this is your chance to go absolutely crazy in the comments with all of your innies and outies thoughts in this episode. Let me know your deeper meanings, let me know your biggest takeaways, what did you like, what didn't you like, let's talk about it in the comments below. Now if you all enjoyed this breakdown, please hit the like button. Let's try to get this video to 2,000 likes, but also consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about Severance like we do every single week. And if this is your first time here watching the channel, I appreciate you all. Welcome to the channel. Consider sticking around by subscribing today. And if you all want to take the support even further, you can do that by joining the channel memberships. Don't forget, you all are awesome. Stay safe. And remember,
Mark Scout's completion of Cold Harbor will be remembered as one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet.